Thank you for inviting me to speak today, and I'm honored and humbled to be here, and I'm honored and humbled to speak about Mary Magdalene because she was a very, very wonderful person. Once again, I have the dilemma of talking about someone as great as Mary Magdalene in 30 minutes. So I decided to talk about what she taught and what was important to her, and I can't really do that unless I talk about who she was. So with that in mind, there's three things that I'm going to try to talk about today. And what the church, these three things are something that the church kept from us for 2,000 years. Who she was, her relationship with Christ, and what she had to say and teach that scared organized religion so much that they had to bury her. My talk is going to sound a little like I'm putting women on a pedestal. That's That's not really my goal, and I don't really feel that way. But right now, we're hearing a lot about how all lives won't matter until Black lives matter. It's kind of the same sort of thing is true with women. All lives won't be equal valued and sacred until women's lives are equal valued and sacred. Maybe this is the pendulum effect for unity and oneness that's just really out of balance in this world. Because of this, I will talk about the values and sacredness of Mary Magdalene and a little bit about some of the other women in the scrolls. Long ago, I had decided that I wanted to learn more about this woman that religion had to offer me. I started reading everything I could get my hands on. Unfortunately, very little out there has impressed me. I have read information written by religious scholars that have degraded her immensely. One scholar wrote, "How could she be anything? She was only capable of washing feet." This from a PhD. I read a book by a man who used the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which is one of the scrolls, to promote Judaism. I have read books about how all the Marys in the Bible were basically one woman, including Christ's mother, that they were only one person and merely a symbol of the feminine. That would actually mean that all the apostles, including Christ, Joseph his father, and everyone was really just a symbol of the masculine. I have read that she was raised in the Isis temple as a prostitute. Another where she was drugged and raped there in the same temple. Another where she taught the art of a type of tantric sex, learned from the Isis temple so she could deliver sexual energy that Yahshua required to become the Christ. Again, nowhere in the scrolls that I have read, or in the Bible, or anywhere, that she was a prostitute or sexual in any form. I'm not a theologian, and I'm not an Egyptian historian, but I have two questions here. Why are all the Isis temples only for women, and all of them including sex? Isis was a powerful being in Egypt that brought her husband Osiris back to life after his brother killed him. She was considered the goddess of wisdom, and she was considered the goddess of resurrection. I don't understand how we even portray her this way. The second question is, why does the world feel that the only value women have seems to be for more sexual reasons? The spirit doesn't have a gender. We don't have a gender. This is what I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. Women must become equal, valued, and sacred in our societies, and we're still dealing with this after 2,000 years, really 5,000 years. It actually started before Christianity. Even authors that feel Yahshua was married believe that Mary was essentially nothing more than a shy, backward Jewish girl that was submissively followed him around in the background. This all seems a little bit absurd to me because I'm going to tell you a bit about what has touched my heart with her in reading these scrolls. And I've also I probably read 20 books on Mary Magdalene, and I pulled out some things that did touch my heart in some of these. I might repeat a few things that I talked about the last time a little bit, but bear in mind with me that they are important. To me, she would have been considerably more than any of these views of her. She would have been Joshua's female equal, his other half. She would have been nothing less than Joshua was in spirit and form. The role he played in his life, he could not have been with somebody less than himself. I've read that Mary Magdalene came from the city of Galilee, a fishing village, because of her last name, called Magdala. I've also read that that fishing village didn't even exist when she was around. So I don't really believe her last name came from that. However, many other authors feel that her name came from Magdal Eder. That's out of Malachi in the Old Testament. And that meaning was tower, or tower over the flock. So they actually would put towers, not big towers, but towers up in the middle of their sheep flock to watch over the flock. And that's really where her name came from. It was a place of honor. She was the protector, the exalted one, elevated and guarding the others. That was her place. I feel in my heart that this is the correct meaning of her last name. Again, I want to be very clear here that there is no writing in the Bible, the Gnostic Gospels, or anywhere where it was ever written that she was a prostitute. There was a pope in 4th, 5th century that said because Joshua delivered her from 7 demons, she must have been with 7 men. That doesn't just degrade women, it also degrades men. I mean, yeah. Can you imagine catching a demon from a man? Right. In 1970, there was a pope that recounted this statement and said that there was no evidence that she was ever a prostitute in any form. But it took him 1,500 years to recount this. I guess that's better than not recounting it at all. But that's 15 years of, this being put out to the public. I'm not going to deny that she was different among a lot of the women, and I believe that she did stand out. Dr. Johns, who was a scholar, and Haile Selassie of Ethiopia, she was an Ethiopian theologian, and others believe that she came from the lineage of King Solomon and Queen of Sheba. And Queen of Sheba was Ethiopian. And through their son, Menelik the first, they believe that that's probably her lineage. If she did come from King Solomon, that would suggest that she was from the Davidic line. And I only mention the Davidic line because the Messiah was supposed to come through the Davidic line, so it only makes sense that his other half would come through the Davidic line as well. Likewise, this would also mean that she was a princess or a queen. She had a royal descent. This would also make her probably very wealthy. It would also mean that she was mulatto and had black ancestors. I believe that she was highly educated and raised with financial means. In several writings I've read where she wore her hair down and she adorned herself with expensive jewelry and clothing at times. This would probably set her up as kind of a little bit of an outcast, in where Christ was and where he moved around in the crowds. I've also read that she was a relative of Nicodemus, who was very wealthy, but he also came from the Davidic line, so that would make sense. She very well could have been related to him. Again, that would make her probably very wealthy. There's also writings that said that she helped support Joshua and some of the other disciples in their traveling. Um, and this because of her wealth and high standing within the wealthy Jewish circles. However, she was not alone in her social standings. Most of the female disciples came from some sort of money or power. If not, they would have had a hard time hanging out with a bunch of drifters, mostly men in that space and time in history. Joanna, another disciple, was the wife of Herod's steward. So she had attachments and high standings, social standings, and connections with the royal court. These kind of connections might have kept them out of being martyrs after Yahshua was crucified. She was also a woman who had access to sacred knowledge. Given the time at which she lived, this fact alone would have rendered her again an outcast in many eyes. She was outside the laws of their society, where such knowledge was strictly for men alone, where women were prohibited from studying the secrets of the Torah or even learning to read the sacred text. However, that what is extremely important here, and the most important aspect here, is I believe Christ loved her far above any others. That became and has been the most significant controversy of organized religion to accept. They've had a tough time accepting that for 2,000 years, and still do. We're still seeing this. I'm going to quote this text. It's from the Gospel of the Holy 12, which is one of the scrolls. It also was found in the Gospel of the Nazarene. Again I say unto you, I and my bride are one, even as Miriam Magdalene, whom I have chosen and sanctified unto myself as an example, is one with me. This text and many others are very clear about Mary being his wife. The question should no longer be asked if Yahshua and Mary were married, but why did organized religion remove and hide this fact? Why was she such a threat? Why did they do everything to push her out of their text? Why did they make her less, even a prostitute? Why were they so afraid of her? And why were they so afraid of women and still are today? I believe Mary was a woman before her time. We've been in the Phasaean age for the, last 5,000 years. Supposedly we left it in 2012. That was a patriarchal age. It was an age of male dominance. It was an age of vertical hierarchy. It wasn't her time to come forth. But the next 5,000 years is the age of enlightenment. This is her time. And I think that's why these scrolls are being found. This is what I'm going to focus on today. Not a woman of the past, but a spiritual being who was suppressed until it was time to wake up and hear her words and fill her spirit. With God, everything is in perfect timing. So here we are. In the Gospel of Philip, when he writes about Mary Magdalene, he says that Christ loved her more than the other women or disciples, and they kissed often on the mouth. All this and more has been removed from our biblical text, forgotten, and intentionally buried. However, the fact still remains that Christ was in love with his beloved Mary Magdalene. Yahshua must have had a love for her that was as human as it was divine. This intimacy could not merely have been of the flesh. It would have been emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. She was Yahshua's physical and spiritual soulmate, his partner in life, his other half, his wife. Now, the dark side of organized religion has many issues regarding sexuality and the feminine. Unfortunately, this burden has been cast on Mary Magdalene for the last 2,000 years. It is interesting that the world only identifies her as a sinner and reformed prostitute. In reality, she was more likely a ministering priestess with a deep understanding of the thresholds of the spirit world, even before meeting or walking with Yahshua. It is a pity that religious started this and used their imaginations to degrade this beautiful image of the feminine, thereby degrading women in general in our world. This has resulted in a Christianity without real women. There are only virgins, mothers, and whores. The logical consequence of this is there's no real men either. There are only boys, fathers, and sexually obsessed males. I have a tough time accepting this idea. However, this feminine betrayal affects us all, both genders, and has lasted for the last 5,000 years. I've seen too much of the abuse of the feminine in this world. Women and their values. Are they good enough? Are they worthy? This is still very much an issue all over the world, even in America, where women still make 1/5 what men do. Women have an 80% chance of being in poverty over a certain age than men, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just now time to find our equality and our balance in a society that's out of balance. It's now time. I'm going to say a little bit more about this subject because this betrayal is ancient. It's ingrained in the fabric of our beliefs, in our religions, and our societies. It was a hidden aspect of religion and a hidden aspect of our societies that has created this outlook. Does it make Joshua less divine because he was fully human and loved a woman? Does it make Mary less divine because she loved a man? What a bizarre view of women this implies, and what a bizarre view of men this implies. I once read that the divine lover is spirit and heart without a body. The physical lover is a body without spirit or heart. There's some quotes that actually come out of the scrolls which say, that which is spiritual even in the works of the flesh. What could it not be obvious that they were completely humans manifesting the divine in physical form? One aspect of Christ or God consciousness and its meaning means that it's free of both repression and self-indulgence. Both of these are manifestations of the ego. Does that not include the body as well? Would this not mean that there was a great respect for each other as spiritual beings without ever making another into objects of pleasure or gratification? There's another quote that says, "Thou shalt not consume the other. You must not reduce another to your own image." If true love could never be possessed anyway, if it could, we could never give of ourselves. So love is free of control. Pleasure is sacred, for it is the flesh filling the presence of God. Joshua and Mary were not the divine that became sexual, but the sexual that became divine. Does this not remove the religious spirit of our past? Remove the dark side of Christianity? Mary followed Joshua from the day they met, and they loved each other for eternity. Is this not the true place of the Holy of Holies, the true bridal chamber? God manifesting in form as a complete human in complete love. In Genesis, it says that God created male and female in his own image. Thus, it is neither man nor woman, but the relationship of both that is the complete image of God. Some of this has been removed even from our Bibles. In the scrolls, it was much more obvious when they spoke. In the Gospel of the Holy 12, the Father and Mother, in whom is neither male nor female, and in whom are both, and each is threefold, and all are one in the hidden unity. Why is it that we forgot this vital aspect? And why has it been left out of our religions and biblical text? Another aspect we should discuss is you will never hear me talk much about the scriptures regarding sins and demons. From my talk last time, remember Christ said there is no sin except for what we make it. And all the scriptures about sin were actually added 300 years after Yahshua was crucified. So these were actually put in there. And we know this because the scrolls that they're finding in the Nag Hammadi library doesn't have sin. It doesn't view sin like the religions do, our religions do. But I am going to mention this briefly because this is one more area where Mary was minimized. Everybody has been told how Christ released her from the 7 demons. I believe demons are those thoughts that hold us back from who we really are. Thoughts like, I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not loved, I'm a failure, I'm lonely, I'm powerless, I'm disconnected. 7 right there. Yahshua healed everyone from demons, most of the disciples and also those who were sick. Of course, maybe that is saying the same thing. Science now is proving that thoughts can actually cause illness. I wish I could totally be delivered from my demons of negative thoughts and emotions in all their many forms. That should have been and would have been a blessing, not a curse. In modern times, we would have said Mary that her heart and energetic centers were now open. Is it any wonder that he delivered her first among his followers? Is it any wonder that she was with him for the beginning of his ministry? I believe her path emphasized inner transformation from the very beginning. The fact that Mary was one to have anointed Christ's feet and poured sacred oil upon him should have been noteworthy. It should have been of great significance. This practice was set aside as a ritual used only by the priest. The Egyptian priestess and the Hebrew priest were the only ones that practiced this ritual. And then it was only done for the benefit of kings and other priests as a burial practice. So remember, she was a woman who had access to this sacred knowledge. These oils were expensive. Not everyone could afford them. Judas thought the money should be spent that was spent on the oil should have been given to the poor, if you remember. Mary is the only one who understood what Yahshua had planned, and only the two of them were preparing for this event. Even washing his feet with the oils with her own hair was an intimate gesture. This would not have been proper between strangers. She was one of the 3 that were at the foot of the cross, along with Mary, his mother, John the disciple. She never left his side. She was the one who prepared his body for burial. Only a woman would have been allowed to do this. They actually say in the scriptures that the women prepared his body, which in reality was Mary, his mother, and Mary, his wife. She watched as Jesus' body was sealed into the tomb. She was the first to see him after the resurrection from the tomb. She had the insight to perceive him always and for all time. So now that we know some about where Mary came from, we know some of her past, we know how special she was, but that was just the beginning. Now it's time to see how special she was to Yahshua as a disciple and her true spirituality. Mary was one who also walked as one of the greatest apostles with Yahshua through his ministry. Mary was not only a disciple, but she was one of the 3 to receive special teaching from Yahshua. The other 2 apostles named were Thomas and Matthew. Yahshua states within the Pistis Sophia scriptures, Miriam, thou blessed one, whom I shall teach the highest mysteries, speak, since you are one whose heart is closer to heaven than all your brothers. Another text said that she spoke as a woman who knew all. Also in the Pistis Sophia, where I am, my disciples shall be. But Mary Magdalene and Johanna the Virgin are above all my disciples and above all people who are to receive the unspeakable mysteries, and they shall be to my right and to my left. I am they, and they are me. It is interesting to me that these 2 women stood out and above all the other male disciples, and Johanna was also a disciple. I am they, and they are me. Was Joshua trying to say that they spoke as he did, and these women should be recognized with the same authority when they spoke? This is not something organized religion would like anyone to know, since they made females so inferior for the last 5,000 years. But it's very interesting what he really said. There's more than one scroll that says the apostles asked her to explain more what Yahshua had told that what he had told her in secret. And that's in the Gospels of Peace. When he's talking to them, they say, tell us the things that Mary Magdalene only knew. So she knew a lot of things. When she would teach them, it was hard for some of the apostles because of the way they were raised in their Hebrew societies. But from the Gospel of Thomas, Peter says to Joshua, "Let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life." So these are some of the things it said. Peter also said, "How is it possible that the teacher talked in this manner with a woman about secrets of which we ourselves are ignorant?" So Peter, being Hebrew, did not like Mary teaching the apostles as she did at times. Joshua would rebuke him. If God has divinely ordained her to speak, then who are you to question her place? Within the dialogue of from the dialogue of the Savior, another scroll, she is praised as not only as a psychic, but also as an apostle, surpassing all the other apostles. Can you imagine where we'd be spiritually now in a world where women could have been allowed to flourish as spiritual and religious leaders, not just by gender or a given place of power? Without the patriarchal vertical hierarchy, men and women would have been recognized for the quality of their spirits as leaders. Einstein once said, "I want to know God's thoughts. Everything else is just details." I loved Einstein. Joshua didn't get all of his knowledge from books. Remember, he knew more than his teacher at the age of 7. He didn't learn about gnosis from a book, and that's N-O-U-S, gnosis, from a book. It became his experiences and knowledge from heart awareness. Remember, the Essenes were called the Gnostics because of their internal and higher transformational knowing. I feel Einstein opened the door intellectually in this age when he said those words. I want to know God's thoughts. Everything else is just details. I believe it's time to know God's thoughts, and Mary Magdalene is now instrumental into the ways we were to know God's thoughts. I believe that is why we are just now finding these scrolls. There are two pieces of information that's really sacred and really scared the new Orthodox religions. Her explanation of the gnosis and the anthropos. So we're going to talk about both of those. Both of these took away the power of the church and empowered the masses. The word anthropos was first introduced to me in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene and became a focal point of her teaching. In the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, anthropos is a person who remembers that he or she is completely human and completely divine at the same time. A place of knowing self as God. This was the marriage, the great marriage, that's been talked to through all different kinds of histories of different religions, the marriage of form and spirit, flesh and God, where self and soul become one. It is quoted in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, the human body was to be a medium or vehicle to access the soul rather than an obstacle. In the same gospel, only the ego can identify opposites, and only the soul knows the union of them both. The other piece was the gnosis and what Christ told Mary Magdalene at his resurrection. And I'm going to read this because this information is important. So this is from the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. It starts with Peter saying, "Sister, we know that the teacher loved you differently from other women. Tell us whatever you remember of any words he told you which we have not heard." Mary replies, "I will now speak to you of that which has not been given to you to hear. I had a vision of the teacher, and I said to him, 'Lord, I see you now in this vision.' And he answered, 'You are blessed, for the sight of me does not disturb you. There where the gnosis lies, the treasure.' Then I said to him, 'Lord, when somebody meets you in the moment of vision, is it through the soul that they see you, or is it through the spirit?' The teacher answered, It is neither through the soul nor the spirit, but the gnosis between the two which sees the vision. And it is this which, and the soul is cut off, the scroll is cut off. It is interesting that gnosis is spelled two different ways in the scrolls, or at least some of the writings that I've seen. However, in Greek, there are 5 words for love. You know, we only use one in English, so that's very possible that there was 2 versions of the gnosis, and that was Gnosis and Nous. However, it may have, words may have been the same thing, but I think that there was a higher version of the gnosis. There was a version of the gnosis that at 7 years old, he knew more than his teachers. There's that knowing, that place of universal filled energy. But there's also a place of the heart, and I think that's a deeper knowing, and that's what we're going to focus on, and that's what she talked about. It's an intuitive known, tapping into universal wisdom. It's a fully developed awareness of the heart. Now, like I said, these 2 versions could be the same, but we're going to talk about the higher one. Gnosis, Nous, in Greek means eye of the heart, inner ascension to a purified heart. Gnosis is considered a very high state of consciousness and awareness, a very high vibration. An intuitive awareness of God. I believe we can find this in meditation. This would be called God or Christ consciousness, the intuitive knowing of God within self. So if gnosis is a property of the heart, this may be an organ, but it's also a place of spiritual perception. They just found out 2 years ago that we have 40,000 neuroreceptors in our heart. They thought that these were only found in the brain. Neuroreceptors pick up outside information. They also can hold memories. They can hold information. So neuroreceptors are pretty powerful, and they were found in our 2 years ago is all. Through the thing about the perception, the neuroreceptors in the heart, is that they would have a clearer perception of truth and a clearer perception of what was being perceived from the outside world. Because in the brain, they found out, this is science, that because the brain is split into 2 halves, it tends to always right, left, up, down. It always tries to balance it some way intellectually, where the heart doesn't have that. So it's considered a truer sense of perception through the heart. But it's interesting that Mary and the Gnostics knew this over 2,000 years ago. Now again, this is from the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Where the heart is, there lies the treasure. This is a place of intuition, God, and love awareness. Also in the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, if the heart or the gnosis is not awake, there will be nothing to understand. Through the heart, a human becomes wholly a God. If we don't see with our eyesight, but with a vision from the gnosis, a form of spiritual perception, then this allows us to know what's real, what's lasting, and what is actually true. This awareness comes from within us. If this is true, then no one can take this power from us. No one has power over us. We should never be giving our power to anyone or anything, certainly not a religion or a political power. This would make us autonomous and powerful. This awareness would not need defending. This conscious awareness can change the conditions and life on this planet. Gnosis is what Joshua and Mary Magdalene walked in. Ultimately, she was saying that Joshua became the fullness of a complete human, anthropos, with the gnosis perception of Christ consciousness. But she was also saying that we too were to become the fullness of a complete human with the gnosis, we would have heart awareness as God's, Christ consciousness and form. A knowing from a very higher dimension. Let that sink in a bit. This is who we were to be. It's just been hidden for 2,000 years. Remember I said last time that Christ came as a pattern. Mary came as a pattern as well. It's a nice re-education to see Mary as an apostle, beloved disciple of Yahshua, one who was worthy enough that Yahshua chose to return to her first, worthy enough to want to have her as his witness, to come to her beyond death because he knew she was the one who could see him with her heart. But much more importantly, Mary and Yahshua were revealing that we were to be completely human and completely divine at the same time. A saint with human imperfections, but with gnosis awareness. All this happens instantaneously. That includes the fact that we have our inadequacies, but also the understanding that we are gods in physical form. This process is to accept the unacceptable in myself and others. We were to be the least and the greatest at the same time, to be perfect in our imperfections. That was how Yahshua became the Christ, and that is how we will become Christ consciousness on the earth. Mary Magdalene was probably our greatest spiritual teacher other than Yahshua himself of all time. She understood what very few grasp even then or even now, then or now. She said that to achieve gnosis, you were no longer an Essene, because they came from the Essenes, but a Christ. In the Gospel of Thomas, when the disciple attains enlightenment, Christ no longer serves as his master, but the two have become equal, even identical. This is what organized religion did not want us to know. This is why she was such a threat to her dominion and control. And this is why they wanted her out, so they could control the masses for the 2,000 years. This is the importance of Mary Magdalene. There's much more I could talk about her life after the resurrection, the groups who helped her escape the persecution, her love for her beloved and how she longed for him, where she went, what she did, where she lived, the time she spent in the cave, her time in Europe, about the black Madonnas found in several hundreds of churches across Europe, how she was loved as a healer, a teacher, how she helped the sick, the hungry, the poor for many years. But there's no time really to talk about all that stuff. Maybe there is. Remember that Yahshua said to her, "You are she whose heart is more direct to the kingdom of heaven than all your brothers." Thus I decided to tell you about what was in her heart and what was most important to her. And this should be the most important for all of us. It was said that in the last 30 years of Mary's life, she was lifted up 7 times a day by angels. I find that so interesting because I believe that an angel, among other things, can be the thoughts that lift us out of ourselves, out of our egos. The very opposite of the demons who held her many years ago before she met Yahshua. These angels were not like the negative thoughts. They were thoughts of spiritual awareness, of love, oneness, and acceptance of who she was, and an acceptance of who she was. You know, I say these things because it's time for us to be empowered. It's time for us to come back to who we are supposed to be. Either way, these angels, in whatever form they came, were the completion of a life well lived. So I'm going to end this by saying thank you, Mary, for your beauty, grace, and loving spirit, for giving us the time to evolve and mature, the tools to realize and experience experience ourselves as the magnificent beings we were called to be. Thank you. Amen.
Amen.